welcome to the Bible for Worship at St. Paul Lutheran Church on this 10th Sunday after Pentecost, when our scripture reading is the 82nd Psalm. God presides in the divine council, in the midst of the gods adjudicates. How long will you defend the unjust and show partiality to the wicked? Defend the weak and the orphan. Vindicate the afflicted and the poor. Rescue the weak and the poor. From the hand of the wicked, rescue them. Without knowledge and without understanding, they wander about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I had thought, you are gods, all of you, children of the Most High. Yet you shall die as mortals do, and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, govern the earth, rule over the nations yourself. The word of the Lord, thanks be to God. God presides in the divine council. How do we picture that? Much later scripture, the book of Revelation, for example, will offer a picture of God enthroned in heaven with Christ as the Lord of heaven and earth, and all of the saints assembled in glory, singing the praises of God. That, however, is a later image than the one this psalmist presents. Because here, for biblical Israel, Israel's God, the one God of heaven and earth, is indeed at the center of the council. But that council is a court made up of all the other gods of neighboring nations and other peoples with which Israel interacts. They are, as it were, servants of God. For the Hebrew Bible and for Israel, this sort of solves the problem of polytheism. How is it that a Baal and an Ashtarte and a Mot and all the other gods of the region that they encounter can possibly be recognized as gods by those other nations? Israel comes to understand them as servants of God. For us, perhaps, it's easier to think of this in the terms that the Apostle Paul gives us in Romans 13, verse 1, where Paul says, all authority that exists on earth is given by God, because there is only one authority, one author of creation and life, and that is God. Whether we think of it in biblical Israel's terms of other gods of the nations, or we think of it in more contemporary terms of all of the God-given authority that exists around us in the world, we're presented with a dramatic scene where, depicted in heaven, these powers are called to account by God. There's judgment on these powers because God sees that there is no justice in the nations, in the world, for the lowest and the most vulnerable in society. They remain exposed to those who work evil against them. And God calls the powers to account for their failure to render justice and defend those who need their defense. That's verses 1 through 4. The next three verses, 5 through 7, are sort of the poet or hymnist or psalmist's awakening, realization to something. And that is that those powers neither know nor understand anything when they allow injustice or even perpetrate and support injustice themselves. And without justice, the world's foundations totter. Justice is the foundation of the world order. Justice is the foundation of the world's existence. And so the psalmist says to those powers, I had thought that you were gods, children of the Most High, all of you, but you shall die like any one of the rest of us. And then in the final verse, the psalmist turns back to God and says, in a plea, arise, O God, take your proper place as the one who governs the world, as the center and guarantor of justice for all people. What a vision. What a remarkable vision and narration of both the vision and the response to that vision. It's a remarkable moment in the history of Scripture, in the story of Israel and God, and coming to understand this foundational place of justice. And what a dream portrayed when the day is envisioned, when all the unjust powers will be banished, and it will be God's justice administered by God's own gracious hand that will come to be for all people. I don't know about you, but I can hear this vision and the glorious image it presents, either as one who is indeed marginalized, who feels at times lowly, ignored, trampled on, powerless, without a defender, despite my evident privilege in America because of my place in society. Nevertheless, I can feel that. And when I do, this is a remarkable psalm that offers me the promise of redemption, of renewal, of vindication, of being rescued from that puny place into which I feel my life has fallen. But I can also hear this psalm as one to whom God has given power and authority, just because of my professional role, my place in American society. And when I hear it as one who carries power at God's bequest and by God's grace, then this is a cautionary tale, because the judgment of my exercise of power is focused on what it does for the most marginal, the most vulnerable, the weakest, the poor, those who feel so puny as I sometimes can. When I realize the power and authority that I have as a child of God, blessed with gifts of the Spirit and called to a life of faithful service in the world, the measure of that, this psalm reminds me, is God's justice, defending those who need defending. God bless.